Hello everyone, thank you. Yes, we have this panel on ESG. ESG stands for environment, social and governance, as you probably all know. And what we will debate a little bit is about the relation between ESG and the peer-to-peer technologies and the peer-to-peer environment, which is not trivial for what I can tell, and we will welcome questions and debate. But first of all, I think the panel members just present themselves briefly, and also, well, introduce why to some extent they are here, because I invited them, but that's
done. Okay, thanks, Tommaso. So yeah, it's a good question. Why? So first of all, yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. I'm, as was said, a professor of actually computational statistics and machine learning within the computer science department at UCL. I was head of department for a while, so I have actually been involved in the blockchain center, but which was great. It's good to see Paolo. But that didn't imply that I knew much about blockchain. It was more in the management role. My main work has been in machine learning and to some extent artificial intelligence. But more recently, I've become involved in some of the ethical and other dimensions of artificial intelligence through assuming a role known as a UNESCO chair. So I'm the UNESCO chair of artificial intelligence at UCL. I could talk more about that in detail, but I won't. But I'm also the director of a new UNESCO center, a center under the auspices of UNESCO in Ljubljana in Slovenia. And both of those activities, UNESCO activities, are closely related to the ESG, let's say, mission, in that they are attempting to understand what the implications of this new technology are for humanity generally, and how we can best use the technologies to actually make change for the better in society.
Right, so thank you for the introduction, Tommaso and Java, and for the invitation to this conference. It's lovely. Also, the location is very lovely as well, so it's a pleasure to be here. As they said, I'm a lecturer in the Department of Computer Science. I work in the Financial Computing and Analytics group. Part of my research interest lies at the intersection of complex systems, mathematical modeling, and data analysis on issues and trends in emerging digital economies. I've been involved, of course, I'm involved directly with the UCL CBT Center, actually since 2016, while I was 16-17, while at the time I was working at a blockchain startup, and then later on I moved to the Imperial Business School in the Center for Financial Technology at the time. This is because I'm looking at issues, a number of issues related to digital economy that includes aspects related to digital asset valuations and pricing. So what is driving the value of these new digital assets? More behavioral aspects related to these new technologies. So how users can drive adoption, and also how we should improve and modify and look at incentive design to make the platforms and peer-to-peer technologies more resilient and robust. I'm also interested in issues related to governance and decentralized voting, among other things. And at the, let's say, protocol or technology stack level, I'm also involved in projects related to improvement in terms of scalability and security at transaction level, and I do consultancy with our industrial partners as well.
Okay, thank you, Tommaso, for the invitation. I'm Maxim Nicholas. I'm currently joining UCL as a research fellow in financial network to mainly work on ESG reputational risk, which we analyze the ESG, but from a public perception perspective. And this mostly involves looking at social media and news media, talking about on these topics, and to analyze the risk of the reputation of firms, etc.
Thank you. So let me start asking a few questions, and let me start from John, and so we go in the order. And I mean, John, the historically technologies, new technologies, to some extent they don't have a good normally the impact on diversity, the impact on equality, etc., is negative. It's almost never been positive. And for many reasons, and probably you might elaborate on this. But the point is that technology is not neutral in itself. We design, we apply them, etc. So how can we make sure that technologies actually do have a positive impact on social environment and governance, and especially how can we make sure that this intermediated peer-to-peer technology will have this impact?
Thanks. Yeah, a tricky question. So, firstly, on the point of new technologies tending to have a negative impact, I'm not sure it's always true, but I think I do think there is a tendency for new technologies to be developed in order to optimize some existing business processes or industrial processes. And typically that will be to make them more efficient, and usually that will mean less people because the costs will be reduced through reducing the workforce in order to make the efficiency savings. So typically the result is that the technology as developed initially is used for an existing process and makes that process more efficient, and so creates unemployment. And certainly if you look at the AI technology, there was a lot of, I would say, even scaremongering that this would be the effect of AI. I think the thing that's perhaps one has to think about is this is just a temporary dip, typically, but then the technology finds new applications which actually open up new business opportunities, and new jobs are created that actually are building on the technology in a new way that is not just reproducing some existing process. And to some extent, I think from the very start, there was the danger that AI could go through that similar cycle. But to some extent, I think many of the companies have actually thought forward rather more rapidly than perhaps in the past about new applications, and particularly, the startup community is continually innovating in new ways with the technology. And I think this has been certainly evident in the London startup community, where many startups have taken the idea of applying machine learning, AI, and in novel ways, be it in the finance area or in other areas. And certainly many of, at UCL Computer Science, we have a large program of master's programs around the area of machine learning, and many of our graduates, we turn out around 240 a year, go into startups in London. And I think this is something that's helped to create this innovation. But I think, that is one thing that is good to do. But I think the other thing that is very important is to ensure not just that the technology tries to innovate in new ways and create new jobs and new applications, but also that it can transfer rapidly to developing countries. Otherwise, we're going to be in a situation where there'll be an even bigger gap between the developed and the developing countries as new technologies are developed first in the developed world, and then, with a big delay, perhaps at some point reach. And I think the AI technologies are particularly interesting in this regard because they don't require massive investment in terms of infrastructure for them to be developed. One needs obviously machinery, but through the internet you can access that often remotely. And we're seeing actually in some of the projects that we're supporting and monitoring very interesting developments of both startups and applications of AI in developing countries, particularly in Africa. So I think it's a very exciting time in terms of seeing how this can actually potentially enable countries to leapfrog into a more advanced state of development through actually adopting these technologies and applying them to problems in their domain. But on the question of the ESG and peer-to-peer, I think the thing that I would want to say here is that AI does represent also a great danger in terms of its misuse. And when I say misuse, this can vary from, let's say, mild manipulation through to clearly, governments using it to control their population, extreme cases of this use of the technology. And we've seen evidence of all of those in that spectrum, I think, already. And the question is, how can we defend against that? So I think there are sort of several strands of activity going on. One is, the fact that many times AI is being used essentially under the bonnet in a hidden way to try to influence people's behavior. For example, push them advertisements that they might click on, but in a way that is not clearly, it's not clear that AI is doing this. It's not clear that they're potentially being manipulated. Similarly, in social media, we have the stories about Facebook, using AI to learn how to keep people engaged. And hey, this really offensive right-wing agenda actually engages people, so let's show it to them. And actually, this is helped to create, I think, very dangerous situations. So those kind of problems, I think, can be addressed by regulation, potentially. But I think regulation is very, very difficult in all of these areas. And indeed, it's a moving target. One could say, we should have a way of making clear to users that AI is being used and how it's being used. We don't have the technology necessarily to deliver that. So making that regulation would be completely pointless. What we need to do is be aware of what the problems are and continually reassessing how we might address them and what technologies we need to develop in order to. So it's a moving target, both in terms of what the problems are, but also in how the solutions might be formed. And we need to be alert and continually adapting. But on the other side of the manipulation of populations and perhaps the more dangerous uses of AI, I think the thing to say there is that the only defense, in my view, and I'm not a social scientist or an expert, but from my kind of, back of an envelope understanding is the only hope is if the population of those countries understand what's going on and are pushing back against those misuses. The problem at the moment we have is that the general population do not understand AI, not even here in developed countries, let alone in developing countries. So we need to turn that around. Part of the reason for that is because of the way in which AI is used is hidden, so people don't see it. What I would want to say is I do believe that ordinary people can understand what AI is doing. Ordinary people, without a massive education, understand how other humans tick. We all have that ability to read human behavior, read and understand what people's intentions are, and so on. If we can do that for something as complicated as a human being, rest assured we should be able to do it for an AI system, which is nowhere near as complicated as a human being in what it's able to achieve. So, but I think that requires much more openness in the way the AI is used, and that should be made more transparent, the so-called human-centered agenda, and that should be, we should at the same time be promoting the education of an understanding of AI by ordinary citizens. And the problem is, typically, people like me come along and try to teach AI as a computer scientist. And that is completely the wrong approach for educating the general population. You need to have a way of presenting what AI is doing in a way that is understandable and accessible to people without a technical background. So I think that's work in progress. It's something we definitely want to do as part of the AI Center I mentioned, the UNESCO Center in Slovenia. But I think that, for me, is the most important thing to try to do in order to head off at the pass the misuse of AI in the manipulation. But the final thing I would say, I think there's a very nice mix or connection between peer-to-peer and AI, in the sense that AI can personalize. We've been looking at how we can personalize education provision through AI learning, and you might charge me here, I'm doing surreptitious learning of behavior and so on, but to some extent, reading it from what people are doing, getting an understanding of their interests, but also their background and experience and knowledge, and then using that to suggest or recommend different educational materials that might be appropriate for their stage of learning and help them upskill. So in that sense, I think that AI has this ability to link with what I would call a personalized peer-to-peer mode of operation in a way that it will make it move to a very, much more accessible level. And to some extent, what the vision we are presenting in the human-centric kind of model of is that AI should empower people by giving them the information that will make their life richer, more understandable, and place them in control, rather than AI being used to somehow maneuver them into doing something without them realizing what's happening as that happens. So I'll finish.
Excellent. Do the other panelists have something to add to this?
Well, I think he already introduced us what we quite sort of at a very interesting level. What I would like to pick up on is possibly the transparency. So there are different issues that you briefly touch upon in terms of the algorithmic side. So of course, we need to educate people also in terms of potential biases that could be implemented in the code. The other aspect is related to not necessarily the algorithmic side, but the data part. So when we access a platform, a digital platform, sometimes we can access it for free. Then you wonder why. Well, because part of the revenue that we're actually giving for free to the companies, the use of the actual data that we produce within those platforms. So what I think is a very interesting, timely topic in this area is data sort of regulation transparency. So I get into a platform, I get 10 pages of privacy regulation that is indeed not accessible to any user. I just click accept and I get into the platform. So I think developing tools that make that kind of regulation and privacy statement accessible to everyday users is one important thing to tackle. And second thing is to properly, so in the context of pricing, to properly price privacy. So we need to attach a cost to the data that we share in this type of platform. And there is some interest in the econ community, but I would say it's a very early stage, and the problem is quite complex. So I think that kind of a joint effort in this area would be very welcome to increase transparency, educate, and actually value what we share with this platform. Of course, we all want to, we have the fear of missing out. We all want to try the new platform, but we also want to be paid somehow for what we offer in return.
In this sense, I mean, the crypto peer-to-peer token technologies could play a huge role in this, because I mean, it can be a way to indeed decentralize the power, and I mean, and a way to give and exchange value, personal value within platform, etc. This has been attempted so far, so it's not something new, but I mean, I would say with very moderate success. So there's a lot of it. Maxim, you want to add something? So, Silvia, you've been in this domain for quite a long time, despite you are only 18.
Thanks for that.
What I want to ask you, do you have examples? I mean, continue on this of successful application of peer-to-peer technologies in the environment and social and governance.
Sure. I mean, as Professor Taylor just mentioned, there is a lot of experimentation, not only in AI, but also in peer-to-peer technologies in the context of, of course, ESG is a very broad area that covers a number of sub-issues. So what I'll touch upon right now is a very limited I'll describe a very limited part of the entire landscape ecosystem of innovation that's going on. Also, John mentioned what's going on at UCL, and I'm also teaching a course on blockchain technologies together with Java here. And we're also encouraging our students to reflect and think about the power of peer-to-peer technology, distributed ledger technologies that can be applied into different domains. So, but also I believe that part of the innovation as education in peer-to-peer technology will be driven by the education sector as well. So in terms of simple or relatively straightforward and already quite developed examples that were put forward in the context of peer-to-peer technology and ESG. Well, first example that comes to mind is the sort of equality part, so the reduction to barriers to entry in the market and the disintermediation, the facilitation of disintermediation by these peer-to-peer technologies. There's been very successful examples in peer-to-peer lending, in crowdfunding platforms where this technology are enabling alternative ways to raise capital, to, of course, with downsides that we may discuss later on in the panel. There are even more timely examples where in period of crisis, if we think about areas where there are conflicts unfortunately going on, crypto and crypto companies sort of were directly involved into opening wallets to receive and exchange value for refugees, and of course to bring capital into countries that are experiencing a severe crisis. On the social side, well, there are a lot of interesting projects at the experimentation level, I would say. So if we think about the hype-driven or area of NFTs and gamification, there are interesting projects, for instance, to leverage social projects and to reward good social behavior. So there are a couple of examples on digital art, for instance, for climate, where people can share art related to climate and then sort of raise funds for climate-related projects. There are solutions where you reward, so people are encouraged to share in peer-to-peer fashion their good social behavior, and they get tokens in reward for it that they can use to invest in social relevant projects. So these areas also quite active, although historically it has attracted a little bit of concern in terms of it's all driven by hype, or it's something really useful for the NFT and gamification space. In terms of, well, more just final comment on the broad ESG space, where peer-to-peer technology are also being used and exploited to improve ESG reporting. Of course, for instance, again, in the context of removing barriers to entry and so on, smaller firms historically have more difficulties because they have less resources potentially to report on their ESG performances, and so these platforms are trying to simplify these processes, automate it, and create an ecosystem where small and large firm can exchange sort of best practices and automate and improve the reporting on that side as well. So this is more on the on-chain data collection for ESG reporting. I guess probably we'll touch also on online or other types of data that can be used for it to improve ESG reporting in this context. Well, I could go on for quite a while on this. Of course, interesting, just to conclude, interesting solutions also concern the environmental aspects. So, of course, facilitating peer-to-peer energy trading. Of course, if you are also in that context, if you are an individual or a smaller firm that has some surplus of energy and you go to the standard markets, the cost may be too high, while platform that facilitates microtransactions and with low cost could open up to optimize and exploit resources, energy resources that come from smaller players in the industry. And related to that, there's all the issue of sort of smart grid management and optimization, and of course the transparency there is used, and the importance of transparency there is evident, and this and the peer-to-peer fashion of interaction as well. So I can stop here.
Does the panel have something to add?
Maybe I will respond to your point after the debate.
Okay, so given that I have a question for you. You have been studying ESGs and in particular the social reaction with, and so I mean I think we are touching the core of the relation between technology and ESG. I mean, new technology, ESG, peer-to-peer in particular. I don't know if you have anything for it, but what did you find? I mean, how the perception of people, how the social perception?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've seen that ESG perception on the public is really important in nowadays. Companies are using their ESG performance as a strong marketing tool. Press release, they communicate about it on social media. But what we were looking at is the perception of the public on this ESG performance, which of course we know that it can be quite different from what they claim they are doing. And well, so you have to be really careful on new categories like gender related issues, diversity issues that basically did not exist years ago. So that's from the general perspective. And Sylvia, you mentioned that we can use blockchain as a tracking tool to measure the ESG performance of a company. But what I wanted to mention is that investors are interested in also measuring the ESG performance of blockchains and cryptocurrencies as well. It is really difficult to capture this ESG performance of blockchain. Of course, we all know about the sustainability issues that some of the blockchain, well, specific to Bitcoin and proof of work are doing. So, but there is many more subcategories that might be interesting from an ESG perspective, like social and governance. While we talk, for example, about the waste distribution that we see in some of the cryptocurrency, and also the governance issue with transparency, etc. So what we think, like, even to give some example, we have lots of companies that are starting to measure the ESG performance, starting to give ESG grades on some of the blockchain. And for example, if you are an investor, ESG investor, or ESG aware agent, you will definitely look at this kind of grades. Maybe to give my example, like for Bitcoin, we are all aware that it has one of the worst environmental issues. But if you have like other cryptocurrencies that have a lower energy cost, like not to name one, Ripple, from an ESG perspective, it might be worse than Bitcoin, because they faced like transparency issue in the past, SEC filings, lawsuits in the past. So from an ESG perspective, you have to make your choice on whether you weight environmental, transparency, and other criteria. So that was for the challenge to capture this things. What I could say also is that you have that new kind of research that are looking at the profile of the ESG investors, and they found that ESG investors are also crypto investors. They have found that you may have an ethical or moral incentive when you invest in ESG that are shared with the crypto investors or blockchain things. And well, when you want to design a new blockchain technology, you need to have that in mind, that people are starting to be aware of this ESG, not only the sustainability issue, but also all of the aspects related to social, which can be the distribution wealth, and also the governance issues. So that's one of the things maybe you need to have in mind for the new technology. And it can be also one of the requirements in the future for the technology to survive, but not only on the sustainability side.
So I think that now it's time definitely for the floor to ask questions, because otherwise we run out of time without giving you any chance. Of course, if you don't have questions, we'll keep talking forever. But
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very inspiring, interesting panel. Yeah, I can see that there is a need, of course, to educate machines on how to look better into the energy problem. So there is an emerging field of machine ethics. Maybe they are trying to do so. But what is the trend? Are we going toward a kind of a normative ethics? And this is what we want, because normative ethics also can bring some constraints, some problems. Who is going to provide the norm? The UN through the UNESCO, or is it fair? Is it unfair? So is it centralized, decentralized? I think I have this question for you, all of you.
want to ask to answer.
I certainly wouldn't. I mean, I think there are several levels. Certainly, UNESCO is not going to be in the business of making regulation. It's in the business of defining. I mean, there is now a recommendation, so-called recommendation on the ethics of AI, which was adopted just over a year ago, actually, by UNESCO. And that's quite a complicated process because you have to get every government who's a member of UNESCO to agree to it. So one government saying I don't like this word is enough for the whole recommendation to be scrapped. So it was definitely touch and go whether it would be adopted. But what it does, it doesn't, as I said, regulate. And obviously, if it were to regulate, I think there was no chance it would be accepted. However, what it does do is set out the principles and some of the key issues that need to be considered. And furthermore, because it's a recommendation, it requires governments to report every 2 years on their activities in relation to implementing this agenda that's specified. So in that sense, it acts as a kind of guiding principle, step by step. And that relates back to what I said before. I think, regulating now would not be possible because, or should not be wise, because we don't also understand the dangers of technology yet fully. They emerge as we use it and as it interacts with people. But also we don't have the technology developed that would help the regulation. So in that sense, we're in a sort of almost like a game, keeping up with each other. But having the guiding principles is, I think, very important. And that also allows people to refer to that and think about how, in relation to that, should we think about regulation. There is a more concrete effort to go towards regulation in the Council of Europe. There was a group called CAHI, which was looking at regulation of AI. And that is still potentially moving forward. But I would be very nervous about anything too normative or specific in that sense at this stage. I think we need to be thinking much more about motivational awareness, particularly with policymakers, and that comes back to the point Sylvia was making about understanding what the implications for bias and fairness, for example, how those operate, what are the potential principles. For example, fairness, a very good one to point to, because people, if you say, we should have algorithms that are fair, they'll say, yes, absolutely. But if you ask them, well, what does that mean? They will probably say, yeah, I know what fairness means. But actually, if you make it precise in terms of trying to understand how you define that for an algorithm, it turns out there are, I think, more than 40 different definitions that are perfectly reasonable and could be adopted and probably are appropriate in different contexts. So suddenly we've kind of opened this Pandora's box of what it means to be biased or fair. And, we don't yet fully understand the relation between policy and algorithm in a way that would enable us to regulate the algorithm. But we're on, we're moving in the direction.
Just a minor comment that sort of links back with one of the initial talks of today that was mentioning that code debugging or catching piece of code is more efficient when it's peer-to-peer or decentralized. So given that we are talking about code algorithms, why not adding then sort of a decentralized look at different parts of the code and maybe have a shared agreement or view on what could be like fairness issue within a piece of code or within a piece of regulation. So I would, because you were asking whether we should go centralized or decentralized, or possibly exploiting also the decentralized policy.
And I could also add that central some big companies that's just on the research side of what they call the taxonomy. So, for example, if they want to capture the fairness of an algorithm technology, they don't even have a specific point to address. So there's a lot of things related to this, what they call taxonomy, to make clear definition of what we could call country. So maybe in the few years, we'll see some work related to that, as we've seen with the sustainability issues. And we may have in the future some hopes based on these things.
Any other question for the panel? Apparently, we have lunch this time, but I think we can spare a couple of minutes. Yep.
Thank you very much, all. Very interesting take. And I would like for any of you to give me your thoughts on the G side of ESG, so on the governance. Specifically, what do you make of decentralized autonomous organizations, for instance, in the ESG space? Do you think that at this stage was more risk than reward? So it's an avenue, for instance, to explore more, to kind of fix some of the code bugs, if you say, of governance in the more traditional space, or just generally, what are your takes on that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's a very active space of research and investigation so of course you mentioned the public governance side, so the decentralized autonomous organization. Then there is the more corporate governance side, or the governance of private / permissioned blockchains, which is also another issue. But on the public side, I think that the idea is interesting to open up for decentralized voting and have the community engagement in sort of proposals that will affect, for instance, a platform proposals, so voting on proposals that will affect the future of the platform and potentially the value of associated tokens and so on. So recently I sort of started working on this project also with industry partners, but I mean, you can probably look at it yourself just by looking at, you take one DAO and you look at the latest 100 proposals that have been voted, and you look at the proportion of winning proposals versus proportion of failing proposal. That's basically it looks like it's useless to have that kind of voting, because most of the proposals that are already been that are being proposed are already successful ones. And also there's research going on to look at centralization issue. So you see that even if you open up the votes to the entire users space, in the end, the votes that are actually determining the outcome of that proposal are only a handful of those, possibly of richer and wealthier nodes in the network. What is interesting, what I started doing on the research side, is to sort of look at the different decentralized voting protocols that are there. Of course, you can modify quorum requirements. You can count the votes. It's one coin, one votes, one token, one votes, or more sophisticated solutions on that. I think also tomorrow or later today, somebody will touch upon these issues. And you see that certain voting structure, if you repeatedly vote on multiple proposals, they may lead to any reward who's voting on those proposals. They may lead to only a handful of nodes to be rewarded and be actively participated in the governance. So it's a huge topic. It's a very interesting one, and it's related to having proper incentive designs for participation in governance, properly designed with the underlying voting structure as well. So maybe we can also discuss about the top line. I don't know if the other panel members.
There is another question. I'm sorry, guys, but lunch should wait.
Again.
Hi everyone, thanks a lot for the panel, it's very interesting. I have a question with regards to slightly different topics. So I also work in a field that starts with peer-to-peer, but it's focused on peer-to-peer energy trading. And so the use of DLTs is also quite big there because it's a decentralized approach to energy trading. So why not use distributed ledger technology? So we are seeing that more and more we go towards sort of digital assets and energy becoming a digital asset. And my question sort of slightly relates to you, and also I think one of you mentioned that this is like an approach where we can create a more user-centered focus, where we can democratize, decentralize the approach of management. But things like, for example, the energy industry, which is a very sort of system relevant, we need to have electricity, otherwise our society doesn't function. My question is often like when we decentralize such systems, everyone is happy to decentralize it, but once something bad happens, so there's a blackout or something doesn't function, there's an immediate call for sort of a centralized person or institution to take over and regulate and govern. So my question is it risky to sort of digitalize or tokenize things such as electricity or energy in this field? And maybe, you know, examples from other sort of industries or areas where this has happened and they found a solution to that.
You're the only one. Yeah.
Well, it's a complex issue, right? I think it goes back to issues, right, overall disintermediation and to the fact that, you know, of course we are trying, we all love, because we are here, peer-to-peer technology, we like the idea of decentralization, but then historically what if you observe at data from peer-to-peer platform, you mentioned energy, but you can think, similar issue exists if you think about a peer-to-peer system to relay transactions, right? Also there, I mean, if the network fails and you cannot relay transactions anymore, it could be a similar, you can map the issue. So what you observe and is that if you have issues, so in the financial side, you could have issues related with liquidity, for instance, provision. So when that kind of things fail, then the entire network will fail. So over time, in all this, in most of the peer-to-peer system, what you observe from the data is that there is a gradual centralization. So naturally, you have service providers that tend to take over the network. This is, in my opinion, for a couple of reasons. One, that is what you mentioned. So ensuring, stability in terms of, a network that's 24/7 active, 24/7. If you don't design the incentive properly, and in most cases that's the case, users will just log into, join the network, then stay for 10 minutes, then leave because they are not making profits. So we observe this centralization in layer 2 solution, in micropayments, in mining, it's another example, in dark markets. So you see that over time we have this takeover of large hubs. How can we solve that? Or do we need to have sort of centralized entities that are in the network? Well, I think that at this stage of maturity of the peer-to-peer network, probably yes. If we manage to review the incentives for users to be actively, engaging with the technology, then maybe gradually we won't need anymore that kind of central player.
I think we should thank the panel and go to peace.